Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending the last interview of the 3-day Fun with Food and Farming live event series. This live interview series was created by Eggscape, 4-H, and Brescia University College. My name is Amy. I am a master's student at Brescia, and I study foods and nutrition, and I will be leading this interview today. Today, I will be interviewing Leah Mete, who is a retail registered dietitian from St. Catharines, Ontario. We will be talking about Leah's job as well as local foods that are grown in Ontario and when they are in season. We will talk about foods that can't be grown in Canada as well. We will also discuss the steps that foods take to get from the farm to the grocery store. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat throughout the interview, and we will take time to answer as many as we can. Also, please let us know in the comments where you're from. So let's get into the interview questions and talk about local foods with Leah. So my first question for you, Leah, is what is a dietitian?
Yeah, so thanks, Amy. Thanks everybody for having me, but thank you, Amy, for that great introduction. But if you're wondering kind of what a dietitian does, so I do a lot of different things, but essentially what a dietitian does, so we go to school to learn the science behind food, and the way that we kind of apply that in our job is that we teach people how to eat healthy, which I know sounds like a very basic definition, but really eating healthy looks very different for different kinds of people, and there are a lot of different things to consider in this. But that's something that a dietitian can actually help you kind of discover. So, for example, like somebody who maybe has a medical condition, so something I'm thinking about that's very common that dietitians deal with would be something called diabetes. And if you've never dealt with diabetes before or don't really know what it is, essentially what it is a imbalance of your blood sugar, which makes somebody not feel very good, and it can have an impact on long-term health. So that's something that can be managed with medication from a doctor's side, but also if you want to do things a little bit more naturally, let's say, or a little bit more holistically, somebody could see a dietitian and we would change their diet to actually help with any kind of conditions that they're having or maybe why they're not feeling well. So that's essentially what a dietitian does, is we help somebody find they're healthy and show them what that means by just changing their daily, every day-to-day eating kind of habits.
That's great. Yeah. So what exactly is a retail dietitian?
Yeah, so a retail dietitian, it is a little bit different than what traditional dietitians do. So this is actually a photo of me in my store. If you go to any of your local Loblaw stores where we are, there's photos of us there so you can kind of know who your dietitian is. So retail dietitians, we work in the grocery store. And I say this to people, and a lot of people are like, oh, that's interesting. Like, why would you actually be there? But think about it, it does make a lot of sense, right? Like, customers who are going to a grocery store are making their food choices at the store. So it really does make a lot of sense to have somebody there to help guide their decisions and things like that. I do a lot of different things in my job. So something that I do is I help people pick healthy foods in the aisles. I help them learn how to read labels. And I also, before the pandemic, I was helping kind of create healthy recipes using ingredients in our store that people could purchase to just show them different ways to eat healthy. Another really big part of my job as a retail dietitian is seeing clients one-on-one. So similar to what I was describing about the diabetes situation, it would be very similar to going to see a doctor, right? When you go to see your doctor, you tell them what's wrong, they maybe prescribe a medication, and we just do things diet-wise. So I actually do that within the store as well. So that's kind of what I do as a retail dietitian as a whole.
Amazing. And why did you decide to become a retail dietitian?
Yeah, I just really liked the connection between kind of food, customer, and how easy that was to make that connection and really make a difference. I like the idea too that it is kind of a community position. So I'm interacting with a lot of people who are in and out of my stores. And it's a little bit less clinical, right? So I'm not in a hospital. Instead, I can kind of like impact a greater amount of people and talk to people who are just like you and me who are grocery shopping. So that was a really attractive part of being a retail dietitian. And I also have a lot of flexibility in my job. So what I think is cool is that not only can I maybe see somebody for a one-on-one session on gut health, but then the next hour I can do a presentation like this with you, and I can help educate the community on what I do, local foods, whatever it may be. So there's a lot of flexibility in my role too that I really enjoy.
That sounds great. And so to become a dietitian, did you have to go to school after high school?
I did have to go to school after high school, and Amy, something tells me that you probably know what I had to do because Amy herself is doing this. So I did my high school, and then after high school, I went to university. So I did a 4-year Bachelor's of Science degree. So in that, there is kind of a specialization in nutrition and dietetics. And the reason for that is that nutrition and nutritional sciences is a very specialized area. So it goes very much beyond just what the scope of science is, right? And this is kind of funny because I would say that our program is very fun, right? Like on one hand, I'm learning biochemistry, and then in the next hour, I'm learning how to bake a pie properly. Like science, it's a pretty widespread thing when it comes to nutritional sciences. And then beyond that degree, I actually did a postgraduate degree, which everybody has to do who becomes a dietitian. There's a few different options there, but something that I did was just like a year post-degree program where I was interning at a lot of different places. So one of the places that I was actually an intern was Loblaw's or Zayre's, where I'm working. And that's kind of what got me interested in the role. And then eventually it just kind of all fell into place, and I'm here now full time.
That's awesome. I am definitely enjoying my time in the nutrition program at Brescia, and hopefully maybe one day I can also work at Loblaw's or something similar. So we have a question from Miss D's class. How do people talk to you at the store?
I love that question, Miss D's class, because this has changed so much during the pandemic. So before the pandemic or before COVID, I was very visible in store. I was there every day. You could see me in the aisle. I actually am wearing my jacket today. Oh, sorry, I'm pointing to the wrong thing. It says Dietitian on it. It has my logo on it. So it was always easy to catch me. And it would be like that at any Zayre's or Loblaw store that has a dietitian. So that's mainly how I was talking to people. But if people want to book appointments with me as well, especially now too, like get in touch with your pharmacy and store, and they can get you in touch with me. And that's usually how I'm talking to people. But with the pandemic changing too, I am seeing people more face to face now. But mostly, I've been seeing people virtually for one-on-one appointments for the past 2 years or so. But I'm hoping that changes pretty soon.
Great, thanks, Leah. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about local foods now that we know what you do as a registered dietitian. So what are local foods?
Yeah, so I think even before I get into this question, Amy, I should kind of preface what I did before I was a dietitian. And this was like a long time ago. So when I was actually in high school, this was even before I was thinking about nutrition. It's kind of what got me interested in food. I used to work on a farm. So I live in the Niagara region, like Amy said. And if you are unfamiliar with the St. Catharines area, it's about 20 minutes away from Niagara Falls. So if you've ever gone to see the falls or know about it, I live kind of over there. And there's a lot of green space there and a lot of farming. So I was lucky enough to work on a farm where I did a lot of different things, but a lot of my role had to do with actually like picking fruits and vegetables on the farm and then selling them and distributing. So that was kind of what I was doing. Here's a photo of me on an apple farm. This wasn't actually the farm that I used to work on, but I thought it was kind of a good nod to what I used to do. And Amy, I'm sorry, do you mind just repeating your question for me? What are local foods? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. So local foods,
that side of things soon.
So local foods, they're grown in the area that they are sold. So because of this, they don't travel a very long way, right? They can come even right from the garden right to your hands in the same day, which is pretty cool. And because they're picked and sold kind of in the same area, there's a lot of benefit to that, which I think we're going to get into. But local foods essentially are being sold where they are being grown and picked and distributed, graded, all of that.
Yeah, so in terms of those benefits, would you say that local foods are healthy?
Yeah, so I like that question because all fruits and vegetables are healthy. I think that's just a dietitian thing. But I think one of the really awesome benefits of shopping local is that those foods can actually be more nutritious. And the reason for that is that it's such a short span of time from when they're coming to the farm to when they're actually getting on your plate. So the longer that trip takes, there's more opportunity for these foods to lose nutrients and vitamins and minerals along the way. So if it's local, if it's close to home, you know that it's kind of like at its peak freshness and its peak nutrition, which I think is really awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. And so would you also say that local foods are good for the environment?
Local foods are great for the environment for a few different reasons. And there's kind of a few scenarios that I even want you to think about or for people who are listening. So even think about like a really populated area that is right near you. And I mean, I saw that we have some people here from Ireland, so I'm sorry I'm not familiar with your area, but for us specifically, an area that would kind of be related to this would be Toronto. So Toronto is a big city. There's lots of buildings, lots of concrete, lots of people, lots of cars. There's a lot of opportunity here for litter, decreased air quality. There's a lot of environmental factors there. But if we're thinking about an area like Niagara, for example, where there's a lot of green space, a lot of farming, it kind of takes that out of the equation, right? So there's like less smog, even like the greens, so like the grass, the plants, whatever it may be, they put oxygen back into the environment. So it's really good for the environment that way. But then also think about the distribution of these foods, right? So things that are coming on a truck, on a train, on a plane, even, it's worse for your air quality, it's worse for the environment, that big travel time. Whereas local foods, another reason why they're so good for the environment is because they're so close to home. So they don't necessarily have that environmental impact, which is awesome.
Great. So we talked about how local foods may be more nutritious and better for the environment, but does buying local foods save money?
A lot of times, yes. And that is really because, again, because of this short trip, right? So when you're buying food at a grocery store that's maybe from somewhere else, part of the price of that food that you might be paying for is the trip that it took, right? Because it is very expensive to get foods from other countries into Canada, into Ontario, into the grocery store. So if you're buying things right there, things can be a lot cheaper, right? And one thing I noticed that when I was working at the farm I was working on in high school, because like we were, in the field picking a bunch of kale and then selling it 10 minutes later, it was a lot cheaper than if you were buying it at the grocery store. And I mean, I know that this isn't necessarily one of the benefits we're talking about, but local foods are also extremely delicious because they are so fresh. So not only are they good for the environment, good for your wallet, but they're just tasty. They're awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you. We now have some time for a couple of audience questions.
Great.
Okay, so this one is a little long, but I will read through it for you. I know that Ontario has a large amount of greenhouse growers, peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, etc. However, I find that many times peppers, for example, at the grocery store are from Mexico. Do you have any insight on this?
Cassie, I wish that I was in control of what was going in a grocery store, especially the stores that I'm working in, because I agree with you. There's so much stuff that is grown here locally, and why don't we sell it at the grocery store? What I find in the stores that I work in particular is that we do go through kind of seasons of things. So, for example, like in the spring and summer months, we actually are selling a lot of those things like peppers and cucumbers from greenhouses. I think it would be great if we sold them all year round. Like I said, unfortunately, I don't have any control over that as the dietitian, but I wish we shopped a little bit more local when it comes to the grocery store. But absolutely, Ontario has huge amount of greenhouses with a lot of different varieties of things. Which, when I was working on the farm, for example, those were the kinds of things that we were also buying if we weren't growing it ourselves. So I'm sorry I don't have the best answer for you on that, but I definitely hear you and I do agree with you.
Personally, I like to go to different farms and greenhouses, and usually they have foods that you can buy right there or a little stand. So I like to do that. We have another question. How do fresh foods versus frozen foods compare nutritionally?
Jordan, I love this question. I love that you asked this because this is like such a misconception. So I think, and I talk about this with clients a lot too, actually. People are asking me this question all the time. And the assumption is that frozen fruits and vegetables are less healthy than the fresh things that you're buying. It is just simply not true. It is a total nutrition myth. And you really have to consider about like when things are being picked and what's kind of happening there. So when you are producing a frozen food or when a farm is, kind of commissioned to do this kind of thing, they're picking those fruits and vegetables at peak season. When you're picking something at peak season, it is at its absolute highest nutritional quality. And once they pick it, they're freezing it right away. They have to flash freeze it, and that retains all of that nutrition. Now, things you're getting at the grocery store, I'm never going to tell somebody not to buy a fresh apple, for example. All those things are very healthy as well. But sometimes it takes a long time for it to get to the grocery store. And the longer it takes, like I was saying, the more opportunity there is to lose a little bit of that nutrition. So if you want to get really technical, frozen fruits and vegetables actually nutritionally can be a little bit ahead of the fresh stuff. But that being said, like just eat and buy fruits and vegetables. They are all very good for you. But I love that question. So thank you so much for asking it.
Great. Thank you for your questions, everyone. I'm going to go back and ask a couple of my own. So which foods are produced in Ontario, Leah?
Yes, lots of foods are produced in Ontario. And you know what? I actually made a few notes about this. So excuse me if I'm looking down for a second, just because I want to make sure I'm covering it. So a lot of fruits and vegetables, they are produced locally in Ontario. And it's because Ontario has a lot of really unique areas to grow things. And I will explain a little bit more about what that means in a second. But things like grapes, pears, squash, apples, lettuce, potatoes, peppers, like we were saying, cucumbers, all of those things can be grown in Ontario. And a unique part about the area that I live in specifically, so like I was saying, I live in Niagara. Niagara is actually considered the fruit belt of Ontario. So if you're not quite familiar with what that means, it means that we have optimal growing conditions that we can grow a lot of fruit and a lot of super delicious fruit. And there is a reason for that. So the region that I live in particular in Niagara, is called the Bench. And a lot of times people talk about this in regards to wine, but it is very true for all of agriculture here. So I live in an area where I live on the Niagara Escarpment. Now, if you're not quite familiar with what the escarpment is, it's essentially like a big mountain or a big hill that is covered in like trees and hiking trails and things like that. But that's not really what is important. What is really important is that it's kind of this big hill, big mountain, and then right underneath it is all of this flat land. And all of that flat land is where we do the growing. And because it has this big mountain or hill beside it, it actually protects all of our crops from really terrible conditions like wind, snow, rain, ice, all of those kinds of things. So that's one of the reasons why Niagara is considered the fruit belt, because the conditions that we are growing in are a lot better or optimal for fruit and vegetable growth here.
That's awesome. Thank you, Leah. I never knew that about the fruit belt before, so that's really cool. So what about other foods, like that may not be fruits or vegetables that are produced in Ontario?
Also a really good question. I think this comes up a lot with clients as well. So when you're talking about other foods, I am kind of thinking that you're alluding to still fresh things. So things like eggs, dairy, milk, meat, all of those kinds of things. So what is kind of cool about the things that are sold in Canada and done here is that they're always in season. So even when you're thinking about just the growing conditions for a fruit or a vegetable versus like a cow, for example, that's going to be giving you milk, they're in barns, they live on farms. There's a lot of like protection for them, right? So that process can happen all year long, which is really great. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting is that all of these types of foods are also going to be local when you're buying them in Canada. And there is a specific reason for that. So in other countries, there are certain rules when it comes to developing dairy, eggs, meat, all of those things. And Canada might not follow the same rules. So a really good example of this would be dairy. So dairy in Canada, we are not allowed to put hormones in our milk, whereas the milk supply in the States, for example, which is right beside us, they're actually able to put hormones in their milk. Canada does not consider that a safe milk supply, so they're unable and unallowed to sell their products in Canada because it's not the same rules that we follow. So not only are foods like that always local all year long, but they are also and not only are they seasonal, but they're also local just because of those types of rules.
And then how can I tell if I'm grocery shopping if a food is local or not?
Yeah, so there's a few different things. So I like that we're using this picture here. So in my stores in particular, we do have some labeling where it will tell you if the food is from Canada. And then like one of the questions we were answering about kind of the greenhouse things, into like the spring and the summer, we're getting more things that are even more local. So things from Niagara, things from Ontario, and it will say that labeled right on there. Now, I think there is another photo I have. Yeah, this is a good example too. So perfect. So this is a label for a dragon fruit, for example, and right underneath it, it will tell you, it says product of Vietnam on it. So if you're reading labels like that or like pricing stickers at a grocery store, it will often tell you where that food is coming from, which is great. When it comes to meat and eggs and dairy and things like that, I also have some photos that we're going to show. It's okay if they don't come up right away, but there's certain labeling systems in Canada as well. Perfect. So even on this, on the very bottom of this milk, it says 100% Canadian milk. So that would be a great indicator that this is a local product. You're getting it from Canada. I also have another example of milk. Perfect, right there. And it's a blue label with a cow on it. That's kind of like our universal sticker for Canadian dairy. So that is another great way. Now, different grocery stores and different products all have different ways of showing you that things are local. So you kind of have to look out for some of those things. This is another good example, eggs. So right on the top there, it says Ontario greenhouses, right? And Foodland, that sticker there. So there's different ways to tell, but it will normally tell you if it's coming from Canada or from Ontario. And you just have to look a little bit deeper into the labeling on the actual food, or even the labeling like as a price at your local store.
Great, that's very informational. Thank you. So earlier we saw the picture of the dragon fruit and that it was produced in Vietnam. So which foods can't be grown in Ontario and why?
Yeah, so some foods can't be grown in Ontario simply because of the weather and the climate, right? So a lot of the tropical varieties of things at the grocery store, Canada and Ontario in particular, we just don't have the right weather conditions, soil conditions to grow these types of foods. So I know I was using dragon fruit as an example, but even things like bananas, mangoes, passion fruit, like all of that stuff that you would maybe eat on vacation. I know bananas are a little bit more common. So those are foods that can't be grown locally for that reason. Now, also think about the flip side too, though. So other countries that produce these types of foods, they also don't have the soil, the weather to produce the foods that we do too. So we have to send food to each other. And essentially, when you are sending food to another country, or if we're getting food from another country, right, we're importing that food in. So we're taking a food from, let's say, Florida, where they grow oranges and we can't grow here. And we're importing that into Canada so that we can enjoy those things day to day as well.
Great, thank you. We have some time for some audience questions now. So what advice would you give grade 6 students about nutritious eating and healthy food choices?
Grade 6 students, I say the most important thing is be curious with food, try everything. If you don't like it the first time, it doesn't mean you're not going to like it the second time or third time. Keep trying things, because really, like I was saying at the beginning of this, healthy really looks different for everybody. It doesn't follow a certain formula. But I think the healthiest diets are the types of diets where people are willing to try everything and they have a lot of variety in their diet, because the more variety you have, the more opportunity you have to get different kinds of vitamins and minerals and different types of nutrition. So stay curious with your eating, eat a whole bunch of different things, and I think that's the best way for you to follow a nutritious diet at your age. I think that's a really good start.
That's great advice, Leah. Thank you. I think we have another question. So what is your favorite vegetable?
Thank you for asking this, because I think it's weird the kind of vegetable that is my favorite vegetable. And I don't even have to think about it. Turnip is my favorite vegetable. I've never met another person who likes turnip as much as I do. I would eat it raw even. So even when I'm cooking it, I will just eat pieces of it as I make it because I love it so, so much. And I'm really boring with it. I'm really boring with all of my vegetables. I love the taste of how vegetables taste. So I don't like putting butter on them, salt on them, anything like that. I just like vegetables kind of in their purest natural form. And I really like earthy flavors, and turnip is one of those things that gives me kind of that earthy flavor. So thank you for that question. I really liked that you asked that.
That's not one that I typically hear. I don't normally have turnip as a favorite. For myself, my favorite is celery, which I feel like it may also be uncommon. I don't even cut it up. I just break it off and I just eat it, one in each hand, and I'm going around and it's my late night snack. And I'm sure my roommates think I'm crazy, but that's okay. So I think we have another question, and it's, what is your favorite fruit?
Oh, this is harder for me, Miss D's class, because I'm a fruit lover. I definitely prefer my fruits over vegetables. My favorite fruit would probably have to be peaches, but I like a Niagara peach. And if you've never had a Niagara peach before, you might not know what I mean. But the peaches in Niagara, and I know it's because I live here, but they are the best. And I love when they're in season, and especially when we get like a really hot and really sunny summer, I know the peaches are going to be extra good. So I would say that those are my favorite fruit, but part of that is because I can only get them for a certain amount of time in the year too. But thanks for that question. I like that.
Peaches are great. My favorite fruit is watermelon. So I'm going to ask another one of my questions before we run out of time here. So you alluded to this earlier, but how does food get from the farm to the grocery store, and what steps are involved?
Yeah. You know what, Amy, this could be a complicated question because there are a lot of steps. So if we're really just going to kind of strip it down and make it super easy, there's a few different ways that foods are getting to the grocery store. So it depends on how far they're traveling, really, right? But it can take like a plane or a train or anything like that. But before it even gets to that step, a farmer has to grow it and a farmer has to pick it. And then from there, it is often sent to a center where that food is graded. So similar to how I was talking about meat, fruits and vegetables in Canada, they also get a grading system. So similar, like if you're in school, you know that an A is different than a B. It does the same things with fruits and vegetables. So when you get an apple, for example, on the shelf, all of the apples, they don't really have bruises. They look nice. They taste great. And that is because those are an A grade apple. So at some point in this chain, they do get graded, and then they are sent to a distribution center. And that's where grocery stores can purchase things. So it's essentially a big center with a lot of fruits and vegetables in it. And say I am Loblaws or Zayres and I want to purchase apples, I would purchase right from that distribution center. And then they would send it from there. So again, it might come from train, it might come from truck, it might do that kind of travel, get to the store. And then we have specific people who work at the store who would take those things off of the truck, make sure they're good to go, and then put them on the shelf. And eventually they're ending up in your hands and on your table.
Wow, it sounds like there's a lot of people involved and a lot of steps and different transportation. I feel like we don't normally think about that. But we have a comment here from Jordan. I grew up in Niagara, and in my neighborhood, all the streets were named after varieties of peaches. That's really funny. I love that. I wish that I lived on a street name that was a peach variety. So I think we have a question here. Do you farm in fall? So this kind of brings us to the topic of seasonality. So you mentioned earlier that milk and eggs are always in season, but what about fruits and vegetables?
Good question. So the season in Ontario and in Canada in general, most of it because a lot of our climate is very similar. Unfortunately, the season's short. So a lot of the local things that we have access to, unless they're from a greenhouse, which we talked about before, our season would be kind of like the springtime, which is coming, to about the fall time. So you can farm in the fall. There's certain things that come out in the fall. Think like pears, apples, onions, potatoes, things like that. Things that are a little bit hardier that can take some stronger weather conditions. So those types of things would be farmed in the fall. What is actually really interesting as well, and this goes beyond the scope of this interview, but there's a lot of science involved in food as well, kind of like I was alluding to at the very beginning of this. And pears, for example, in Ontario and in Niagara specifically, we are developing a type of pear that actually the growing season will go into winter time. And the reason for that is that so local people can have access to local foods for longer. And again, this is like a big scientific process that they do. And we have a center in St. Catharines specifically that does the science behind this. But you can actually get those things at Costco. They're selling them to local Costco's. So if you're seeing local pears in the wintertime, they're actually being grown here, which is pretty cool.
That is cool. I might have to go to Costco and take a look. So I think we have time for one more audience question before I conclude. So what do you like most about being a dietitian?
Oh, there's so many things. I love being a dietitian. I'm so happy I took this career path, and I know that maybe this sounds very simple, but it's very true. I just really like helping people. I love helping people feel better because a lot of the people who are coming to see me, they might have a diagnosis, like a medical diagnosis that they don't understand, or they might just feel not very good day to day. And it really is amazing how food choices and lifestyle choices that I can help somebody with can really make a difference in their life. So I'd love to help people. I love to help people make them feel better and make them feel more like themselves. I would say that that's definitely the best part of my job. But I love situations like this too.
You make me very excited to be a dietitian soon, Leah. And sorry to everyone that we don't have time to take any more questions, but we appreciate you asking them. So thank you for your questions, everyone, and for sharing this information with us today, Leah. So today we talked about Leah's job as a retail dietitian and what she does. We also talked about local foods that are grown in the area that they are sold. And local foods are healthy and good for the environment, and they also provide local farms and farmers with money. And there are foods that cannot be produced in Ontario as well, like bananas or dragon fruits. And these come from other countries and are called imported foods. And we discussed the trip that foods take from the farm to the grocery store as well. We do have an activity for you. So it's a color name local foods activity that we encourage you to complete. We have sent this to all teachers who registered for this interview or another one. And we also ask that teachers complete the post survey that's on page 3 of the activity booklet. We hope you enjoyed this interview series and learned a lot. The live interviews are posted on Facebook and YouTube for you to watch at any time if you want to watch any of the others that occurred over the last few days. And happy Canadian Agriculture Literacy Month.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. This was a lot of fun, and I hope I could teach you a few things here and there. But thanks for your questions, too. I loved answering all of them. So thank you.
Thanks, Leah. Bye, everyone.